All right, welcome to the very first podcast, the Benjy and Cal podcast. This is, of course, a proof of concept. Benjy and I, we were in Bar together. We had all manner of conversations underneath the sun, all sorts of philosophical conversations about religion, about AI, about consciousness, about the soul, all sorts of stuff. So we've decided to maybe try to have one of those conversations now.
That's right.
In a recorded format.
That's right.
And we are at my apartment this time.
In Jerusalem, the holy city.
Exactly.
The eternal capital of
the Jewish people.
Already.
Maybe that'll be
jumping right there.
Maybe that'll be
politics already.
Yeah,
but it's a special place.
Yes, definitely. So here we go. So we didn't exactly decide on a topic before we started, but we recently were at a Shabbat meal a couple weeks ago.
What is Shabbat?
Shabbat, Benjy, is...
for our listeners.
Yes, the seventh day of the week, Sabbath in English. It's supposed to be a remembrance of God resting on the seventh day. And it also, of course, carries a lot of meaning for lots of people. And
you eat.
We eat.
You eat.
Typically. People pray as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be a time for taking a breath, having some time with family, with friends, not looking at screens, not doing work, that sort of thing. So anyway, we were at a Shabbat meal a couple weeks ago in Jerusalem, and Benjy mentioned the hot take that time. Benjy, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What was the position on time?
Well, I don't quite remember either, so I'm gonna put words in my mouth anyways. I believe I said that time isn't real in the same way that you might think it is.
Okay. So what does that mean? How do we think it's real, and how is it not what we think?
Mm-hmm. So, what does it mean? What is time? What is time for you? How would you define time?
Whew. Define time. Well, I don't know if I can define it right now, but basically, it's right now, and then something just passed, and now it's now again. But the moment that I said it's now the first time, that's no longer here. It was in the past. It's as if we're always moving. The same way that you might move, you might imagine like a little character on a screen moving on a line at some constant pace, just moving. And you might ask him, well, what is this movement that's happening? How do you define it? He's sort of like, well, it's just sort of happening. I know that I was there before, and now I'm over here, and I'm going to continue moving.
Okay, so time is change.
Okay, I like that.
Okay,
yeah.
So what would happen if you don't change? What if you were to take an area of space that just doesn't change, that there's no visible change? How do you know that time passed for it?
So no matter what scientific instrument we use, we can't detect any change on the atomic level, anything. There's no aging there's no wear and tear, there's nothing. Everything is constant. Right.
And it's pretty theoretical because I think atoms themselves will decay over time.
Mm-hmm.
So assuming you just have like a vacuum of space, then I guess does time apply in that vacuum?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah. Or at least in the way that I've been exposed to this topic in the past, the conclusion has generally been that no, time does depend on some sort of physical change occurring in order to show that the time occurred. If somehow you kept everything still and frozen, as if you paused time, then I don't think time would be passing. Now, as soon as we imagine ourselves observing this situation, so we are there and observing it, and we can remember that we started and then we're still here. Like, so in that sense, there's time, but that's our conscious minds are now part of the equation, and we're violating the condition that we said that everything is just constant.
Right.
So if truly everything is constant and we're not even there observing it, I don't think any time is passing.
Interesting. Okay, because I remember you saying, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Okay.
But what was your take on it?
Well, in my memory, I thought you were saying that you were focused on the fact that time is, or at least the measurements that we use for time are agreed upon socially, and they're not objective. Like the fact that a minute is a minute, or a year is a year, or the way the calendar is set up. Like all these things, they're what we use to measure time, but they're not really objective. They're just what we've agreed on as the way we're going to measure time.
hmm So I guess what I meant when I said it is that like time doesn't exist as you think it does, but like in a lot of different ways. Like one is how we subjectively perceive time, how time is in the physical reality, like the physical laws that that govern time, how time is connected to space and directly connected and can't be separated. And then yeah, just the cultural uh, meaning of time and how we measure it is also like very arbitrary and maybe for an insect time passes faster, although I'm not exactly sure how we know that, how we now know how other like beings process time. Because, but like always in the movies, the bugs, the smaller you are, the slower time goes, and maybe because signals travel faster in your brain because you have a smaller brain, and signals travel faster to your senses because there's a smaller distance. But, you know, a bee's life is 7 days or something, like a regular worker bee, a drone, 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
For humans, it's 100 years on average, probably less on average.
80.
80. 100 is a good amount.
Mm-hmm.
But, like a turtle, which lives longer, moves slower. So, just in terms of, the fact that we divide the the calendar into 12 months it could have been different, and maybe for a different species of intelligent beings they would divide it different. I mean, almost for sure they would, because they wouldn't arrive exactly at our division of time, although there are reasons to why we divide time into like 60 minutes, because has a lot of divisors, whole divisors, 12, 6, 3, 2,
Oh, interesting.
5, 10. So that's easy. It's easy to divide a day, um, or an hour.
Okay.
Uh, I guess an hour. So there are reasons, but it's still arbitrary. I think that's what I was driving at. But we'll discuss any of the different ways that I meant that time doesn't really exist.
So I was waiting for you to say that because that's what I remember you saying at the Shabbat dinner, and until now, it sounds like you've been saying something that I would say is more reasonable.
Grounded reason. Yeah.
Um, but then you finish with saying that that's all the different ways that time doesn't really exist. So here, this is part of what you were doing already, but we can separate the actual thing called time from how we measure it or how we perceive it, right?
Okay.
So how we measure it, for example, that we have something called an hour that consists of 60 minutes, or even that there's a day. Now, of course, the day is based on the rising and setting of the sun, but we could have based it on something else. We didn't have to base it on. And same thing with months and years, etc. And then also there's how we perceive time, which is like you might be having a very fun time. You might be having a blast, and you feel like time passed quickly. You might be really bored, and you feel like time is passing slowly. So all these things are, I guess you could say, I'll accept for now that they're arbitrary or subjective, but there always still remains the thing that is occurring in the world outside of your perception, which is that time is passing. And you might say, what does that mean? Well, maybe it does. Maybe it is based on the fact that changes are occurring, but those changes are occurring in. Well, I wouldn't say it's the same as the changes occurring. It is clear that time is linked to change, linked to physical change that occurs, but the physical change doesn't all just happen at once. There is some process in which it's happening over a stretch of what exactly? Well, we call that thing time.
hmm So, yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna. I was never saying things don't change.
Okay.
Um, things do change because we were somewhere, and now we're in a different place.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess the other thing that I was talking about was how time is relative to everything. So if you, from what I understand, if you were to travel super fast, close to the speed of light, to the Andromeda Galaxy, which is, um, I don't know, 200 million light years or something. I guess we could look it up. Let's
I have no
assume.
idea.
Okay. And then you were to travel back. Okay.
Okay.
How much time would have passed for you? Well, you're going super fast, right?
Hmm.
Close to the speed of light.
Hmm.
It contracts the distance between you and the Andromeda Galaxy, like space itself contracts, and you arrive there almost instantaneously. And you turn around, you go back home to Earth, space again contracts,
Uh-huh.
you arrive there almost instantaneously
From your perspective.
from your perspective.
Hmm.
Yeah, because you can never reach the speed of light, but as you get closer and closer, like space itself starts contracting. There's this given, there's give and take between time and space, blah blah blah.
Okay.
But if you're on Earth, then 400. So you left your friend here on Earth when traveling. So you'd come back, and 400 million years would have passed.
Uh-huh.
So what does that mean for time then? Because that means that
Right.
what you said before, oh, things are changing elsewhere.
Hmm.
You know, as you could stay in a room where nothing changes, but outside of your room, things are changing. But at the end of the day, it actually matters what it's relative to, because
Hmm.
if your box is traveling around the universe, things are changing outside of your box at a different rate of time.
Right.
So you could say things are changing everywhere all the time, but it's all relative to what you could see, to your universe basically. You know, anything outside of your observable universe, you'll never be able to see. You can never prove that time is changing differently for that.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely things are passing, and we could, for the most part, just rely on, our normal day-to-day perceptions of time because they're pretty constant. But underneath it all, at the very finest level and theoretical level, they're not constant. It depends how fast you're traveling, how fast I'm traveling. Even if,
Right. Meaning there's kind of a way that time works for us because we're all on Earth and Earth is traveling at whatever speed it is through space. And so for everybody on Earth, we can all have a sort of standard common understanding of time. But as soon as we expand our vision to the rest of the universe, to all sorts of things moving at different speeds, and even somebody on a spaceship moving near the speed of light to the Andromeda Galaxy. So now it becomes much harder to think of any standard understanding of time
right.
or
But even here on Earth, if I go up a mountain, so
okay.
I'm further away from Earth's center of mass,
Hmm.
or if I'm driving and you're staying stationary,
Hmm.
then there will be discrepancies in the amount of time that's passed. It's just so minuscule. It's a matter of nanoseconds
Hmm.
that maybe over time it could add up to like a few seconds. Like they
So
did this,
so if you want to live a little bit longer, you should drive a lot,
right, but
travel a lot.
probably only be 12 seconds or something. But, or they did this twin experiment with, there are these two astronauts. One was in the space station for a year, and the
Hmm.
other stayed on Earth.
Okay.
And like he, after a year, he was 12 seconds older than his brother,
Wow.
or younger, one of the two.
How do they know that you're 12 seconds older?
Well, what you could do is take an atomic clock to the space station, like synchronize two clocks, take one up a mountain or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But they calculated the 12 seconds or whatever because of Einstein's equations, which have been proven to be correct in other situations.
Mm-hmm.
So they extrapolated that it should work as well for this situation. So So it's just more to like think about time as not something that's just constant
Hmm.
for everyone. Even for me and you right now, it might like for all intents and purposes, we're aging at the same rate. But I mean that's itself might be a biological question, but we're experiencing time at a very similar rate, but it's still not exact.
Uh-huh. And by when you say we're experiencing time at a very similar rate, but not exactly the same, it's sort of like if we, um, I'm actually not sure what we mean by that because do we mean that we're kind of measuring time for me by how rapidly my body is aging or
Yeah, I guess I was talking about the atoms in your body.
okay.
Because probably from a biological point of view, your cells maybe just age differently than my cells. So regardless, like maybe, you know, I'm more like a turtle and you're more like a bee, and I'll
Hopefully,
live
I hope not.
longer. Well, I mean, yeah, hopefully not, but maybe what is the difference, you know? Let's say you're someone that lives a lot faster, but a shorter amount of time
Hmm.
versus someone who moves a lot slower but lives longer, you know, at the end of the day, maybe they're sort of equivalent. What if you could live 1,000 years, but you could only move, you know, a thousandth, 100 times slower?
Hmm.
It's the same, sort of,
Though it's
pretty
probably
much.
not the same because you wouldn't be able, you would be so different from everybody else that you wouldn't be able to have the social experiences
Sure,
that other people have. But
sure.
yeah, I'm still confused as to what we mean that the two of us sitting in the room right now are experiencing time slightly differently. Let's say it's slightly different.
Okay. So we are, there are tiny discrepancies in our proximity to the center of the Earth and how
Okay,
fast either of us are moving. I mean, we're moving,
we
we're
right
pretty
now
stationary.
right we're both stationary. So is it that movement I understand, and then proximity to the center of the Earth. Okay, so that's like altitude, right? Because anywhere you're on the surface of the Earth, aren't you the same distance from the center of the Earth?
Um, yeah, but there are tiny discrepancies in the mass of the Earth. Like
Hmm.
the core is probably not um, a perfect circle. You know, there
Hmm.
where we are is not a perfect flat, you know, perpendicular to the, you know, we're not perfect radii to the center of mass of the Earth. So just to think about it more like a floating point number of what time is. It's just the best we could do is an approximation
Hmm.
of how fast time is going for us. And like that, if we did have an internal clock for both of us, then there would be, if you go to like 1,000 decimal places,
Hmm.
it would be off a little.
Okay. Uh, I think that makes sense to me. But let me point this out. So it could be we're in complete agreement on this, but there's a difference in phrasing maybe because time is still it's still objective, meaning that it's really happening. And even when we say it's relative to how fast you're moving or your in the case of being on Earth, how close you are to the center of the Earth. I mean, the fact that we're on Earth has is kind of like that's our world of time, which I'm calling it right now. And if we were on if we're on a spaceship traveling really fast, time would be different. But for example, the guy who travels to the Andromeda Galaxy and then travels back, and you said for him it was like a couple seconds, and then for if I was on Earth during that whole time, it would be 400 million years. So that's fine, but we can still, um, even though time was in a sense different for the guy on the spaceship versus me on Earth. Um, we can. It's sort of like I can convert the understanding. Like I can understand what 2 seconds means, right? When you say for him it was like 2 seconds. Well, it was like 2 seconds on Earth, right? You're using the Earth language of time to explain how much time it was for him. So it's sort of like whatever amount of time he experienced, if if we were to convert that amount of time to Earth time, it would be a few seconds. But that same amount of time that he experienced in actuality, in Earth time, while it was happening, was 400 million. So even though there's a change going on here, we can still talk about it very objectively. It's the same thing we can do with distance, right? Distance also is very much relative to our size and our vantage point. You know, when I'm if I'm on a football field, so okay, so running the whole length of the football field, it's a fairly long distance, but a human can do it. Whereas if you shrunk me down to like the size of an ant, going the whole length, going 100 yards would now become a much greater distance because it's so much greater compared to my size and to the size of my stride.
Right.
So in a sense, you could say that
But
if I'm now the size of an ant, a football field becomes like 100 miles instead.
mhm. And it's similar in the same way to time that if you go fast enough, then space actually contracts because you have to compensate for the fact that, nothing could go faster than the speed of light or approach it. So what happens is that like the space itself contracts and like the distance actually is shorter. Like if you were to measure it from far away, if you were to look at what the distance between, like if you're looking at two people traveling very 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 fast, let's say. So you're watching me, travel to the Andromeda Galaxy,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like I'm going very slow from your point of view. And so when you measure, you know, you're saying, okay, well, he's going this fast or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that amount of um, that amount of space. So you have to say, well, I guess, space must be a lot shorter for him or something. I forget the exact way you look at it, but if you're looking at someone and measuring how fast, how long they've traveled and the distance they've traveled, it'll look different for you as an observer from far away
Mm-hmm.
than for them.
Yeah.
So the space itself will look different. But your point is that
Right.
you could measure it or talk about it. You could talk about it in terms of you could harness it with with certain measurements, and you could say, it could be the grains of in the sand timer. How we originally started was using a sand timer, how many droplets or whether the candle would melt the whole way. That would be an hour, let's say, or one
Mm-hmm.
candle's worth or something.
Mm-hmm.
Not very precise, very subjective, depends on the candle. Even the most precise atomic clocks, are still not, there's still an estimate at the end of the day. There's still error in it. So, yeah, you could still talk about it with your approximations. Um, but I would say more, and you could convert and you could use these equations to convert between. But I would say more that the what they do talk about the arrow of time moving, like the only thing we truly know about time, not just the estimations,
Mm-hmm.
but that entropy increases over time. Like as the universe continues, then entropy increases. So when it's like when you throw as the universe goes on, as time goes on, things are more likely to break down. And like if you had a closed room, then eventually everything would start, disintegrating. Energy between the molecules would break apart. Even at like a regular human level, things would start um, like bi um, biological materials would start breaking down, decomposing, um, structures would collapse.
Okay.
So even though we could counter entropy over time, everything moves in the direction of higher entropy, and then over time, eventually at the end of the universe, um, it's just going to be a uniform universe of nothingness where like nothing changes. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's like I think the predominant theory of where the universe is heading. That like in billions of years, um, eventually everything will be uniform. The stars will have used up all of their energy, um, the stars are just fusion reactors that are just pulling down it's themselves with gravity, and then fusion is I don't know the correct terms, but emitting all of this radiation. And then over time, eventually you run out of fuel. Eventually you run out of energy. Eventually it just becomes uniform. Life stops. The universe, nothing changes in the universe. And then you could say, in a sense, time itself has finished.
Okay.
And that is like the direction of time, the reason why things don't fall up, why entropy does it, the reason why as I stumble and fall, I fall to the ground rather than all of a sudden go in reverse and pull myself up is because of the increase in entropy. So that's
Okay.
like it's the one consistent thing you could say about time. And it's still a very vague thing that's very different for everyone and will take a lot of time, and but it's, yeah, a lot of time.
Hmm. So wait, what about the human being in all this? Because granted, if we're talking about in billions of years, okay, so who knows what's going to happen with human beings at that point? But let's talk about something more present because
They'll
you
be dead. Or
we'll see.
something very different. But that would
We'll
be an
we'll
interesting
see
topic
of conversation.
of conversation.
Okay. Stay tuned, everybody, for episode 2.
What will happen to humans? How will humans end up? What is the conclusion or the end game? Or is there no end game? Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
always the phrasing. Okay, so like you brought the example of the reason why you fall down and don't. In other words, the reason why gravity pushes you into a more disorderly state, such as falling down, rather than bringing you up into a more orderly state, like standing up, is because of entropy. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. Like what is it that we perceive as time passing? Why, like we all know that there are states. Like we think of, and how you define time was like we're in one state now, or objects in the universe are in a state one, and then they're in state two.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever that is, the that that thing that transitioned object A from state one to state two
Mm-hmm.
is called time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more just entropy, and entropy itself increasing.
Okay. Um, so, what about the human being and his attention to limiting entropy or to bringing more order into the world rather than. So, like, my bedroom, I haven't cleaned it in months and it's dirty. It became more and more dirty the longer I didn't clean it. But if I were to take the time and clean it, I would then be decreasing entropy. I would be cleaning my bedroom.
Mhm. So that's the question, what about life? Like why did life arise, which is another another good topic. So what will happen to humans as well as how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what what's right. So the question is what about life? Life creates order of things. We create buildings
Mm-hmm.
that don't collapse. We take Lego and then we create a structure.
Mm-hmm.
Entropy
Would
would require the opposite,
right.
and not creating order out of chaos, but rather chaos out of order
Mm-hmm.
over time.
Right.
So the answer to that, I'm pretty sure, is that you just have to look at a bigger scope.
Mm-hmm.
So when you clean your room, you have used energy to clean your room.
Mm-hmm.
You've broken down pizza and noodles, whatever you eat
Mm-hmm.
in your body. You've emitted it as heat, sound, and that's the breaking up of whatever of that order into chaos, which is the heat and sound that you've released while converting your room to a orderly room. So when looking at the bigger picture, entropy has increased overall in the system because you have to look at also uh, the byproducts, which is, you probably also threw out a bunch of stuff that goes into the garbage while cleaning your room.
Hmm.
You've cleaned up dust. Um, so all of that itself is entropy that you've just shoved in another corner and said, "Hey, look, my room is clean." But you're ignoring all of that. You have to still take that into consideration.
So, but now entropy has taken on a new meaning to me. It has kind of taken on this identity of just sort of a word that describes. It's a word without judgment. Chaos carries a bit of judgment, and when there's too much chaos, we want to provide some order. But it seems that you can never have too much entropy. Entropy is just it's like gravity. It's like the wind. It just is. Is that accurate?
Um, I guess I'm not entirely sure what you're saying, but if you're asking like what is entropy, is it like on a more objective thing, not just a clean room versus a dirty room? So how I look at it is, and I'm pretty sure that this is how most people look at it, but it's like meaning I didn't make this up. But when you roll dice, let's say you roll 100 dice,
Okay.
the probability that you wind up with all ones is extremely, extremely low.
Hmm.
Possible, but very low.
Right.
What you're more likely going to get is some random combination of six, three, five, seven, whatever, four.
Right.
Um, and so you look at whatever you wound up with, and that's probably going to be a more sensical, chaotic result, but it's just a more likely result. So if you look at um, like how many uh like okay, let's say you take you build a whole nice um Lego sculpture, and then you break it down, okay, and then you're left with this pile, okay,
Hmm.
or okay, sorry, you have a whole bunch of Lego pieces, okay, you throw them into a pile, you toss them, or you shoot them one by one, not with a lot of power. Is it possible that it'll happen to create a Lego sculpture out of it?
Hmm.
We'll say yes, but with very low probability.
Okay.
Most likely you're going to end up with a jumble
Yeah.
because there are just billion, trillions, whatever, innumerable amounts of combinations for how it could end up,
Yeah.
which is more chaotic and more of a jumble than the organized way. So that's what it means, that it's just a probability of things ending up in a more jumble-like structure than not.
Right. So I have to bring in the human again because I'm in the Lego situation. It's very clear to me how the human can decrease entropy, but then in the general universe, uh, it's less clear. And you said it seems that in the Lego case, if we confine ourselves to the Lego case, you can reduce entropy by human attention because the human could build the Legos into something that we would say is not chaotic, but rather quite ordered.
Mhm.
But your claim is that if you broaden your vision and the scope of the situation, then even human attention, never decreases entropy, never brings more order into the
Right.
universe.
Well, so it's just a matter of scale. Again, I think that it's just, yeah, humans are way more efficient than a lot of other natural than just the natural processes of let's say a thunderstorm. Just you're never going to wind up with a sky. I mean, you could. You're just very likely not going to wind up with a skyscraper just from the natural forces of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Shooting around stone, but humans can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that we are overall decreasing entropy elsewhere. We're just much more efficient. So elsewhere, as we build the skyscraper, we're burning a lot of fuels in order to do so, and that burning of fuels breaks down, um, you know, uh, something that was into a higher entropy state.
But couldn't we burn the same amount of fuel to destroy a skyscraper, or to build something that doesn't work?
Yeah. So we could be less efficient. So overall, the entropy will still decrease, and go from a lower entropy state to a higher entropy state, but
Increase. Entropy will still increase.
increase. Yeah, sorry.
Mm.
But I think humans, yeah, will just do it more efficiently, and they'll just be like less, the state will go from uh, low entropy to slightly higher low entropy if humans do it, versus if they just, throw dynamite at it. Like if they do it intelligently, more efficiently, the entropy won't be as increased as much because you'll only burn so many fossil fuels and and cut out so much rock from the mines or whatever. And like at some point, it's just that the atoms themselves are breaking down as as the time passes. It's just that overall still the entropy will decrease even if it seems like it's not. We could yeah.
So, so let's say because especially if we go to the time frame of billions of years, again, let's say I accept for the sake of discussion that over billions of years we'll eventually reach a state of total entropy. Um, but it seems that even with what you just said, it seems that even you were admitting that human effort and human attention can slow the rise of entropy. In other words, that entropy is not getting to these. We're not getting to that state of total entropy in billions of years at a constant, unchangeable rate. The human attention is with proper human attention and effort, we can delay that outcome.
Right.
That's you're on board with that.
I guess so, yeah. Maybe it would be, yeah, more that other, you could look at it that humans are more efficient or that other processes are less efficient. I don't know. But overall, at the end of the day, no matter how efficient humans are, we're still going to wind up out of energy at some point. Even if we harness the sun's power,
Mm-hmm.
use solar panels everywhere, eventually the sun will burn itself out because of entropy.
But will there be another sun?
Yeah, you can move on to another sun, I guess, and then eventually run out of suns. But just looking at a smaller picture, it will wind up burning all the fossil fuels. And once you burn gas, you're turning it into a higher entropy state that doesn't have the same amount of energy as before. You can't burn it again. So there's this, um,
Mm.
you're even though there's like conservation of energy, it's not usable in the same way.
What about nuclear fission?
So yeah, you could do that, but eventually, once you use nuclear fission, you destroy the atoms themselves. They the atoms break and emit radiation instead, and they no longer exist. They're converted from mass to energy via whatever Einstein's equals and blah blah blah.
Okay.
But they're no longer you can't use the same two atoms that you fused to emit radiation again afterwards. You've destroyed it forever.
What if over time all that energy becomes matter again?
Well, in order to convert, you can convert energy to matter, but it requires more energy, I think. Unless I might be talking about just making BS now, but I'm pretty sure
We're now past
we're
the edge of
past
my
that.
edge of my. No, no, not for you. I'm
Okay,
saying for
right.
where we're talking right now is completely past the edge of my understanding. But
I think energy can be converted to mass. It makes sense. Um, I I think you just need more energy to do so because you can't do so with 100% efficiency because of the issues of entropy. So you could, I don't think we've ever created mass from energy. Um, uh,
well, we can look that up. But what I was asking was not whether we've created mass from energy, but rather whether energy might, by some natural process, become matter over time.
some natural process.
Yeah,
Um, well, I see here that scientists have turned mass into energy. Um, and then,
mass and energy. That we know. That's splitting the atom. We want energy into the mass.
sorry, energy for mass. Yeah, we have conversion of energy into mass happens all the time. One simple example is positron electron pair. production by gamma rays of more than 1.2 million electric volts in the presence of a heavy nucleus. I don't know what that means, but they've hit they've aimed some high energy gamma rays at atomic nuclei created mass. Um,
Mm.
but and it probably happens at a on a natural scale too, because you have high energy gamma rays all the time from other stars um, in the universe, and and it probably also happens. But overall, because it's not 100% efficient, it's converted into some lower entropy state overall, and and so eventually we'll run out of energy, we'll run out of mass, I guess, or we'll just be left with some boring nothing universe.
Okay. Uh, I want to go back to something that we almost touched on while we were talking about all that, and that is the universe deterministic? And why did I ask that question? It's because I said that human attention can slow the inevitable time when all entropy pervades across the universe, and you did accept that. But then is the universe not deterministic because humans may or may not apply the proper attention, or humans can apply more attention and effort to reduce the amount of entropy and therefore slow the spread of entropy, or they can apply less and then we'd have a greater spread of entropy.
I feel like you're using free will as a
I'm assuming free
you're
will.
assuming free will here.
Mm. But okay, so fine, keep going.
And
If you.
that's how you turn it into a matter of determinism versus not determinism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but from my definition of determinism, it's more just is the outcome uh, determined from the initial, is the outcome of a system or the final state of a system determined from the initial state?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because all of the transitions of the system are are fixed or
Mm-hmm.
something. The rules are fixed.
Right. The rules of the physical rules are fixed, and you can boil down the physical phenomenon that will happen into a set of rules, and you can even predict what will happen based on the initial state, and the actual thing that will happen will follow exactly the prediction if you understood the physical rules fully.
Hmm. So the reason the universe doesn't isn't deterministic, as far as I understand, is because I mean it's still I think not a final. I think philosophers, scientists are still discussing this, um, but one of the reasons we know that it's not deterministic is because of quantum uncertainty, which is that you can never really know when or whether an atom will decay. There's
Okay.
just a high probability, like the half-life of an atom is when like if you have a sample of uranium or something and its half-life is 50 years, that means in 50 years you'll be left with half the mass because half of it will have uh, broken down and
Mm-hmm.
been converted into energy
Okay.
because it's radioactive. Now, I'm pretty sure that like you could repeat this experiment and the mass will have some variation because each atom, if a uranium atom has a half-life of 50 years, what does that mean? It means it decays after 50 years with 50% probability. I think that's what it means.
Okay.
So you look at this uranium atom after 50 years, half of the time will be there, half the time won't.
No, no, that's not what that
Not
means.
half the time, but like,
No, hold on. That's not what a half life means. Half life of 50 years means that half of it will evaporate or like go away after 50 years.
break down.
Break
Right,
down.
half of the whole sample.
Half the whole sample.
Right. But if you're looking, what does that mean on an individual atom scale? That means that each atom will only break down with a 50% probability because you'll be left with
Oh,
half of
oh,
the atoms
oh, interesting. Okay.
because they didn't break down and half of them because they did. And it won't be exactly half
Ah,
because it's a probability.
Interesting. So that's what that really means. You're
Yeah.
saying.
And
So there's a possibility that the whole thing would break down.
yeah,
Okay.
it's just very unlikely.
Right.
And every atom has a half-life. It's just the more stable ones are billions of years or something.
Hmm.
And so that's the first thing about how the first idea of how the universe is inherently probabilistic and not deterministic. Um, and the other one is just the position of quantum particles like electrons, which even though they have mass, they just have uncertainty about their position. So they exist. The electrons in the atom exist as a probability wave, um, meaning they don't because of their size. Eventually, um, if it's small enough, they just exist as a probability wave. I'm pretty sure it's because of the size. Um, that means that every object also has some overall uncertainty of its location at any given time. So this paper towel roll ultimately exists as a probability because it's made up of atoms which contain electrons and other subatomic particles that are quantum.
Sorry, I can you explain again the probability surrounding? You said there was a probability even about whether that paper towel roll is really is like will remain there, or
Yeah.
so. Can you explain that again?
So every subatomic particle exists in a quantum uncertainty. So an atom, which is composed of protons, neutrons, quarks, well, each of the protons are composed of quarks, electrons, those are all subatomic particles. I'm pretty sure exist. They're considered quantum, meaning they have uncertainty surrounding that. Their position at any time, and they themselves exist as a wave, a probability wave. They don't exist at a fixed point in the universe unless you measure them.
Okay.
Uh, but in general, they could exist anywhere in the universe. It's just very high probability that they're in, this place at a given time.
Hmm.
So this paper towel world, which consists of atoms, subatomic particles, quantum material, which are all probability waves, this paper towel roll can exist anywhere in the universe and be like broken into its its parts distributed across the universe. I'm not saying that this paper I mean, yes, the paper towel roll could also exist halfway across the universe. It's more likely that it would be in a billion pieces across the universe, but the point is that it could exist anywhere. It's just very likely that it exists right here.
Okay. Um, I have a question. So we typically think of rolling a die as a probabilistic experiment, right? There's a chance, 1 out of 6 for every number, assuming a six-sided die. But that's because we have no idea how to measure all the variables that contribute to how the die will show up. So essentially, it's random to us, right? Because we have no idea. But if you had somebody who knew the exact orientation of the die when I released it, the velocity that I released it at, the exact if you had somebody who knew all of the physical properties of the system that we were in, he could, I'm venturing to say right now, predict the exact role of the die. So maybe all of the quantum uncertainty that we're talking about is like that, in that there's an illusion of probability to us because we don't quite know what the outcome will be, but in reality there is no probability. It's determined somehow.
Mm-hmm. So it's a good question whether quantum phenomena affects the probability of a rolled die.
Mm-hmm.
If it affects like any if you're going to predict the roll of the dice, you have to build a simulator that, given the initial state of the system, assuming you know all that, rolls the dice in the simulation and then gives you the outcome. But in such a simulator, in order for it to actually model the real world, it would have to have the quantum probability functions that govern the behavior of atoms.
Okay.
Now, is it possible that you could build a simulator that's without uh, this high resolution and doesn't use the quantum probability function and still gets it right 100% of the time because it's at such a large scale? Maybe. I don't know the answer to that.
Wait, I think we're
But
I think I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing. My thought was that the what we are calling quantum probability may actually be certain in some way. The way it's deterministic in some way, we just don't know how. And then was that what you were talking
uh,
about?
no, it's not deterministic in some, like, we don't know how it is because you can measure uh, a quantum uh, subatomic particle and it'll be different every time. And it's like inherently impossible to predict where it's going to be. Meaning, if you did build a simulation, you run the simulation, it would give you different results every time because it's just a probability function. It's not deterministic. I thought you were saying,
Hmm.
I think we can build a, a good enough simulation to predict the rolling of the die. Um, but
That's a
right,
fine thing to respond to. That wasn't what I was saying.
right.
Um,
Because like on a large enough scale, if you have just a ginormous, let's say you have a giant coin, and you want to, you could maybe flip it into, I don't know, if it's large enough, maybe you could create send those uncertainty probabilities to be negligible so that you get it like 99.9999% of the right time correctly. But okay, that's again not what you were saying. You were saying,
that's interesting. So what I was really trying to get at was how do we know? It sounds like you're saying quite definitively that the universe is not deterministic due to quantum uncertainty and due to the fact that these experiments that I'm not sure how to explain what they are, but they change every time you observe them, and the electron or the photon could be anywhere at any time, and based on when you observe it, it's whatever. You can't predict it. It's okay. So let's say I accept that that is truly not deterministic. So it seems in our conversations in college, it always seemed that you took a physicalist worldview, and what I thought that meant was that it was essentially deterministic, and then also applied that to the human being as well. The human being is essentially just not essentially, but it is truly just a physical machine, a biological physical machine, and all of our actions and thoughts and everything are deterministic in a way that we don't know how. And there's an illusion of us being at the driver's seat, but we're just along for the ride. But if we accept that there's quantum uncertainty at the basis of reality, and that at the basis of the universe, and that the universe itself is not deterministic, shouldn't we also apply that to the human being and say that the human being, and we haven't really gotten to free will yet, but at the very least, the human being is not deterministic.
sure, yeah, if it's because the human being is a part of the universe, then and the universe is non-deterministic, then there is a part of the human experience that is non-deterministic just in the human itself, not even interacting with the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's why I think it goes back into that to what I was saying about precision of a simulation and how much do these quantum effects actually play a part.
Okay.
Like if if I could build a simulation that doesn't use probability, that predicts the rolls of dice based off their initial whatever, then I could say that this quantum uncertainty doesn't have really any effects. It's negligible. And I could say the same thing for humans. On the one hand, yeah, maybe you have some one of the atoms in your brain decides to it breaks down, and then that affects one of the neurotransmitters, one of the molecules that's affected, that affects the neuron, and then you get this whole butterfly effect, and then you get a different result, and then
Mm-hmm.
you wind up saying something else. Um, or maybe it's just so negligible that it doesn't really affect anything. Like if you were to slap me 99.9999% of the time, I would react in the same shocked, upset way. You know,
Really, if I did it over and over again, why would you be shocked anymore?
Well, this is right. Nice one. Okay.
I'm joking, but
Where's the laughing sound effect? um, so yeah, but that so humans will respond most of the time the same way. But so I don't know how much it has an effect. Maybe it doesn't have that much of an effect. Maybe it's more just the universe, the environment that you interact with is more affected by quantum effects than your own personal brain, which is or body, which is a lot smaller compared to the environment. Um, but yeah, yeah, and even and so now, like, what would that mean for the for free will or the human experience? I don't think it would mean much because it would just mean that there's a little hint of randomness inserted into everything.
right. So I hear that if you already believe that there is no free will, then the the fact that there's randomness due to quantum uncertainty in the universe is not going to convince you that there's free will. But it does seem to provide a sort of something to buttress the belief that because I'll put it this way, like, okay, so if we can agree that the human is not deterministic, that my behavior is not deterministic, that even on that from a on the physical level, on the purely scientific level, looking at the physical phenomenon, there's something uncertain in what drives my behavior, then it doesn't seem so far to say that there could be some scientific explanation for free will. That free will, that once you combine the human identity and the human consciousness with this world of uncertainty, so there's a level of influence that the human can have that is non-deterministic, and it's all based in some quantum basis of meaning it allows for someone who believes in free will to not necessarily have to assume an entirely metaphysical soul in order to justify it logically.
Um, I would disagree respectfully.
Okay.
Again, I just think that the quantumness is just like a bit of randomness that you have no control over, and it's not I don't it's not you're kind of saying like, okay, there are other things that maybe affect the human condition other than just how his brain is pre-programmed. Therefore, there could be something else like free will, whatever that is, affecting the human condition.
Yeah.
And and to me, I just don't separate, free will from the human body. Like anything that exists, if you have some uh, higher a higher layer that in your brain of behavior
Mm-hmm.
that determines how that affects the lower layers of your brain,
Mm-hmm.
then and you want to call that the free will layer because it's more in charge of choosing actions on the whole. Like at a lower layer, you have your breathing part and your more animalistic behavior parts of the brain,
Mm-hmm.
and your higher layers of the brain, um, which is also like biologically accurate because like the lower down you get to like the amygdala, and all of these emotional
Right.
animalistic parts of the brain, and then you have the outer layer. I forget what it's called, the corpus callosum or whatever, which evolved later. This
Mm-hmm.
layer evolved later.
It's like C sharp versus assembly.
Sure, yeah, exactly. It's just a higher abstraction
Mm-hmm.
that can affect the lower layers and turn them inhibit them. You could hold your breath, you could choose these things, but it still all exists within the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have these parts of the brain that are more in control than other parts in a way. At the end of the day, you can't free will yourself into holding your breath for more than 20, I don't know, an hour. I'm pretty sure no one can.
An hour.
Yeah, well,
I might be ignorant about that, but that seems
I think.
ridiculously long.
Yeah, well, I mean, because you'd be dead. That's it. But
Okay.
like people can, David Blaine or whatever, he can hold his breath for like 20 minutes or something crazy
Hmm.
by entering some sort of state of uh, of whatever
Hmm.
where he doesn't need to breathe. So I just went with an hour because that
For
would
sure, no one
guarantee,
has.
yeah,
Yeah, 24 minutes and 37 seconds is the
the world record,
world record for the longest time.
which is crazy.
Yeah, it's not by David Blaine. It's by Budimir Sobat.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. David Lane is just the one that does it as a spectacle for people. He like almost died doing it on Oprah or whatever.
Uh,
Because I don't know, it's one thing to do it in private, and another thing to do it with the whole audience, with all the pressure, and then
uh,
it's harder to put yourself into that state of relaxation.
mm,
And so he almost died forcing himself to do it.
mm,
And he might have gotten like permanent brain damage from it.
well,
But the point is that, as far as we know, you can't do it.
right,
Maybe it's possible, just no one's in it.
right.
You could throw yourself off of a bridge, like, even though that would kill you,
Mm,
people have done it. And so you could free will yourself into some pretty crazy things. But there is a limit, and it's determined by the other parts of your brain a lot as well.
okay, so I mean, the claim of free will definitely does not claim that you can hold your breath for longer than an hour, right? It doesn't claim that you can, because I chose to do it, therefore I can do it. In fact, I would say that free will has nothing to do with whether the effect of my action, the effect of my choice has any particular effect. It has nothing to do with what actually happens in the real world. That's not really in my control.
Well, I'm talking about your body, but not effects in the real world, like you necessarily passing a test,
Okay,
because that's dependent on how the teacher grades the test. But
okay.
holding your breath is only dependent on you.
Um, oh, okay, okay. So, I thought we were assuming holding your breath for an hour and living.
Oh, yeah, no, you can't do that.
Okay.
Uh,
No, we
Not
understand.
even free. Yeah,
Right.
I wasn't even saying free will could say that. Yeah, I
Okay.
just meant doing something
That is against.
against your natural inclination.
Okay. So, but that seems to me to be an unhelpful way of thinking about free will because I wouldn't. Um, Even though you have the freedom to do it, doesn't mean you should. I mean, even though you
Right.
have the freedom to jump off a bridge, doesn't mean you should. Even though you have the freedom to hold your breath for an
For
hour,
sure.
doesn't mean you should. So the only time where thinking about free will is really relevant is when thinking about, okay, what am I free to do and that I should do? Or what else am I free to do and maybe that I should not do?
So, like addiction, let's say, if you have an unhealthy addiction, everything in your brain is telling you
Mm-hmm.
continue this unhealthy behavior. Here's a dopamine rush every time you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Free will would, I assume, in your case, say, I'm going to stop this unhealthy addiction.
Um, I'm not sure even about that one. I have gotten to the point in my life where I do accept that there are situations that people can get into where the only way out of them is with help. But the free will isn't accepting the help, I think. Meaning it's not true that it's always just up to you. I don't believe that. Meaning you can have somebody who's addicted, and if he were to tell himself that, hey, I'm going to get out of this, I'm going to get back to health, he's probably never going to. But if he realizes that he actually has no ability to get that he's so far into the addiction that he actually accepts that he is unable to save himself, then he has a chance of being saved because then maybe he'll accept external help and intervention and rehabilitation. Um, so there's something a little counterintuitive that goes on here, which is that the choice to get the outcome, the choice to the choice that led to the outcome that let's say you wanted of getting out of your addiction was the choice of not believing in your own power to get over the addiction. Now that's in that case specifically. What I'm really getting at is that the way I really think about free will now is that it may be possible to always boil down free will to only a binary choice. There's always simply a choice of am I going to try to find the good and helpful path in this situation that will be good for me and good for the people around me? Or am I going to not bother? Or am I going to do something else? It's basically just that. Like, it's that or just anything else. Um, And so even when somebody is addicted, doesn't necessarily have a choice of whether or not to be an addict because that might be where he's at this point. There's all sorts of things going on in his mind that are beyond his control. But he always has a choice of, am I going to just be an addict and just not try to get better, or am I going to try to get better? And that's really the only choice that anyone ever has at any point.
Well, okay, a couple things. First of all, I'm not even sure I agree with the fact that those are the only two choices.
Okay.
I think one choice could be, well, I'm gonna try to not do it today, and then, or try to not do it for 2 days, or I am gonna stop, and then deciding not to stop, and then, so it's not as binary. And the other thing is just to clarify my position that um, I think that as thinking of your self as a deterministic being with no control over your behaviors, although it might be more uh, a true reflection of reality, I think it's unhelpful, and that that belief itself affects the probability of
Right.
you choosing certain choices that you might want. But at the end of the day, anything that you do want, any choice to overcome an addiction, just comes from a different part of your brain with a different incentive. I think the brain is just divided into different areas with different incentives. Some days we want this, some days we want the opposite. Some days we get a kick out of this, some days we get a kick out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're just competing systems with different incentives, and some days one is more in control than the other. Or if you overcome your addiction, then you've successfully, not successfully, because I'm pretty sure it's still a constant battle. You could always regress back into it, but that you've really poured a lot into you've really developed this part of the brain that wants to stop the addiction, and you've inhibited the part of the brain that wants to continue the addiction.
But what led you to do that? If it was in your brain to want the drug to be, your brain was configured at that time to be addicted. So what could have possibly led you to inhibit that part of the brain that was
Well, it
most
could
addicted?
be a loved one wants you to stop the addiction. It could be because you've heard from your doctor that this is bad. Your community, your doctor said this is bad for your health. You have a desire to live. You have a desire to um, have a healthy lifestyle, and that's a competing
Mm-hmm.
incentive to just wanting the drug.
But couldn't you decide that you don't care about any of that and you're going to continue taking the drug?
You could. Um, I think always in the back of your mind, there will probably be a part of you that does want to get better,
Mm-hmm.
and not. I don't know if this is a drug that leads. It depends on the drug. If it's drinking a bit of alcohol and you don't see any negative side effects, then there is no part of you that really wants to stop. Or if this is a drug that winds up leaving you in alleyways and getting stabbed by people or doing crazy things, then there's probably going to be a part of you that says, I don't like this experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm losing my teeth. I don't know. If there was a perfect drug that just gave you a high, no negative side effects, and you liked how you were on it and you felt authentic, then yeah, maybe I don't know, the incentive to stop would be very small. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but you're saying, can you decide one way or another? Yeah, but I think it's your decision is dependent on how you feel about this, whether it's a good drug or a bad drug. You're saying, if I gave you $1 million to continue the drug even though you don't want to, then the incentive is now $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
If the incentive is just to prove me wrong, that's also an incentive.
Mm-hmm. But you can choose your incentive. You can choose a more moral incentive versus a more immoral incentive.
But based on why would you choose something? Because of your upbringing, because of um, your development. Certain genetic predispositions, maybe.
Um, I don't deny those things have an effect on the decision, or maybe on the difficulty of the decision. But and also, you don't have to follow your upbringing.
I think that every decision you make has a reason for it. If I gave you two objects, random weird looking objects, put them on the table and told you to choose one, right?
Hmm.
Maybe these would be complete. You're saying, oh, this would be, there's no, I don't want any of these. I have to choose one. They're completely arbitrary. They're ridiculous objects. I don't want them. You choose one. I think it's because it's closer to you. It looks, it's easier to grab. I don't
Okay.
know. There's nothing, I don't think you could freeze a person I mean, you can. That's what indecision is. When you don't make a decision,
Hmm.
which is a decision sort of to not make a decision, but you're not really making that decision. You could be indecisive
Hmm.
because the competing incentives are so similar that you have no reason to or you can't choose one over the other. So you're stuck in analysis paralysis.
But there's a fundamental spirit that undergirds this whole process. That I think is more what we choose. Meaning, it's true that there's all this stuff that I don't, but the sort of the me underneath it all can look at it and say, okay, I'm going to try to utilize all this to be a good force in the world, or I'm going to try to utilize all this for my happiness, or I'm going to look for some high level, beautiful aspiration that I can chart myself toward in life with the understanding that there's something might happen and I'll freeze in indecisiveness. Another thing might happen and I'll feel impulses this way and that way, etc. But the sort of like the underlying spirit that I bring into the whole experience, I can choose that for that spirit to be an optimistic and good one aimed towards good, or one I don't necessarily think of it as aim towards bad, but rather that lack of aim towards good, that one of just like I don't care to aim towards good, so uh, I'm going to kind of like lean into a spirit of uh, letting myself go, or to not to not search for that higher direction that would guide me to something.
But why do you choose these things? I think A, these feelings are still all in your brain. They're still all developed over time. And you choose to be good. You choose to not be bad because your parents taught you to be this way. Your community, your
Well,
your incentive, they're on a higher abstract level than your base decisions, but they were still formed at some point in your life, maybe even early on when you don't remember it, and very subconsciously, so you don't remember or couldn't point to an actual time when it happened. It was a slower process of seeing, hey, I don't like people who do bad things. I don't like being hurt. I like the feeling I get when I am a good person. I see those people being good and having good lives. I want that for myself.
mhm,
Environmental environmental interaction and reinforcement of certain behaviors
mhm.
and beliefs.
So I'm willing to accept that it's in a sense something in your brain that develops at a certain point in your life. There's a moral understanding that doesn't develop until maybe around teenage years, or maybe a little earlier. But a 5-year-old doesn't have the same choice certainly that a 20-year-old does. But at the same time, I can still choose or not choose to use it, and the more I use it, the better I get at using it. We can think of playing guitar, um, like the skills or the whatever psychological thing goes on in my body and mind when I get better at guitar is not something that I invented, but rather something that already existed, and I simply allowed it to develop, or I developed it by practicing. But the
Let's go back for a second to what you were saying. Why do you think that kids don't have choice as much
Well,
as
yeah, I didn't say they
adults?
don't have choice, but they definitely don't have the same. there's definitely a development of moral choice over your life.
What do you mean?
Well, we can go to the extreme and definitely agree that an infant who just came out of the womb doesn't have certainly doesn't have the same level of choice that an adult does. It's hard to judge. Maybe it's hard to maybe infant's a bad example because it can't express to us anything. So let's say it can't. Let's fast forward to a 4 year old who can express things. But we still would say he doesn't have the same choice as an adult.
What?
He doesn't. I would agree. I think you're trying to. I think you're trying to push me into a place, but I will happily go there. Which is that yeah, he doesn't have the same part of his brain that has properly developed, where he can tap into like an understanding of cause and effect, right and wrong, consequences, the pain of other people. Um,
But but I'm more just trying to just get a definition. What do you mean that an infant doesn't have a choice? If you say TV, do you want the phone or do you want broccoli? He's going to choose the phone because he wants the screen
yeah.
time and he
So
doesn't want the broccoli. So
So I actually wouldn't really say that that's a choice. That is a following one's preference. And a choice, I think, is only become the word choice. I think only becomes relevant when we talk about a moral choice. Because if you're just offering me a phone or a piece of broccoli, then I will just do the one that I want. And what I want is not something I chose.
I think it's the same thing, just a matter of complexity.
Okay,
What would be a moral choice that you as an adult can make that a child can't make?
a moral choice that I, as an adult, can make and a child cannot
Mhm.
make.
Sacrificing your life to save more people,
That's pretty intense, but okay.
endangering your life,
Um,
using your time to volunteer rather than,
okay.
okay. But I don't, just because a child wouldn't make that choice because he's more selfish and only, I think children are definitely less aware,
Hmm.
are more simple in their decision making and their understanding, in their ability to express themselves and uh, act as an agent and in their agency for themselves. You know, if a kid wants to stay up later past his bedtime, he can't because his parents control him.
Okay.
When you're later in life, unless you're a slave, I don't know, depending on the person, but you have fewer people controlling you, and so you have more control over your own um, destiny, let's say, and
Mm.
your own time. So, I agree with all of those, but I think a kid would just make the decision to not volunteer and play and watch TV all day because he just has incentive to just watch TV. He just cares more about himself and he likes the shiny screen rather and doesn't want to work and do something he doesn't want to do because it's effort and doesn't understand the value in it. But when you're older, you do understand the value in volunteering. But you
Hmm.
both can make that choice. It's just the choice is different.
Wait, how again can both make the choice? The 4 year old can't make the choice to volunteer, or he can't.
Well, I'm saying you give him the choice. Do you want to volunteer?
Uh huh.
Do you want to, I don't know, pull out weeds uh, to help this poor guy?
Hmm.
I don't know, or shovel his, I don't know, something that's not fun
Hmm.
to help someone in need.
Hmm.
And he would choose to not do it. And someone older would choose, you know, plenty of people would also not choose to help because they want to focus on themselves. But if you're saying,
Yeah.
but some people would choose to help because they find the value in that that a child wouldn't.
It's actually not a great example because I don't think you have. I think volunteering is supererogatory, but not morally obligatory.
It's super what?
Supererogatory means that it's good to do, but not required to do.
Okay.
Or maybe you could say that it's required to do at some point, but not required to do at any point.
Uh, Required? Who requires anything?
Oh, well, okay. So we have to go back.
Required is just a matter of who's going to enforce it,
well,
in
hold
my
on.
opinion.
So what I was working with there when I said that was that there is a moral distinction between the case of I borrowed $10 from my friend and I'm now faced with the choice of to pay him back or to blow him off. I would say that I'm morally required to pay him back. It's not a this is good to do, but I don't have a moral obligation. No, no, you have a moral obligation to pay back your debt. To pay back your debt. The question, if we then flip it around to the friend and go back in time to when you lent the money, it is a nice thing to lend money to a friend. Although in a separate conversation, I would advise against it. You should just give the $10 to your friend rather than risking a relationship because lending money can be more uh, difficult than just giving it. But anyway, let's say it's good to let's say he wants to lend the money to his friend. It would be a good thing for him to lend $10 to his friend, but he's actually not obligated to do so. There's no moral obligation upon him that says you are now obligated. What? Okay, and you're like, what does that mean to be obligated? Because I believe in morality, and I believe that there's meaning. What I mean is when I say that's why I said morally obligated. That
So I understand the distinction, and it is a helpful distinction for certain acts,
mm,
and like you said, loaning versus repaying. But at the end of the day, the reason why one is morally supererogatory or whatever you said,
supererogatory.
supererogatory,
That's a real word.
suppository, is because if you don't loan your friend $10, he'll understand. He'll be like, okay, it's your money. Maybe you need it, and you don't want to risk. I don't know. You have reasons for doing it that are understandable, and no one's gonna force him to do it to loan you money because that's just. I mean, people could in theory, but the way our moral system works is you don't force people to do something that they don't shouldn't have to do because
Mm-hmm.
then you lose the whole system would break down. But on the other hand, if you don't repay your $10 back, then all of a sudden you have a problem that will be enforced by your friend, who's
Mm-hmm.
first of all going to be upset,
Mm-hmm.
um, he, your community, which if they find out will I don't know, not ban you, but will lash out against you for being a dishonest person. Your reputation will uh, will be harmed
Mm-hmm.
as someone that isn't reliable or trustworthy to pay back the money that they said they would.
Mm-hmm.
The police can even get involved, and that those are all things that are completely absent in the case of just loaning money. But that's the required part. That's where the required part is ultimately derived from. If you look back far enough.
Okay, so what you're saying is that when we talk about moral obligation, what we really mean is that the social consequences would be much more severe,
Yeah,
and that's really all it is.
yeah.
Um, I uh, I want to continue down this thread, but I'm my mind is getting tired. I can't even remember what we said 2 sentences ago. Was there something we were talking about that we then went into this as like a sort of deviation from that?
We were talking about free will and what a moral choice was. We were
Right.
talking about kids versus
But yeah,
adults.
the kid choosing versus the adult choosing. Um, right, and then I said that the word choice, only becomes meaningful when we talk about a moral choice. And you were saying that there really is no such thing as a moral choice. It's just it's a different level of complexity in the calculus of the choice.
Mhm.
And I think what you're getting at with the lending money and paying back money is that what I am interpreting as a moral choice is really a calculation of social consequence.
Mhm.
Is that fair?
I think so. And like there are social, I was with someone, and we needed, they weren't using their gloves.
Uh,
Um, and, I needed some gloves and because it was freezing and they were using them. So
mm-hmm,
there, and it would have been nice if they lent them out,
mm-hmm,
but they didn't want to. But there is still like a bit of like it's obviously not at the same extent. It's not there's because it's their choice really to lend the gloves or not, but there still are social consequences even of your supererogative um, choices, at least in that example.
Yeah, meaning there are times when we would say that you're within your right not to do something, but to do it requires so little of you and would be so meaningful to somebody else that to not do it would almost be just like what the hell's wrong with
Hmm.
you?
Which is a whole interesting thing on its own because, like, when uh, asking someone to do you a favor, like it's a whole. People don't really think about it. There's no, as far as I know, there's no theory of favor asking, but there's a whole calculus to it, like you would say, and like let's say let's say you have a car, you're driving back to a place, um, and let's say like we barely know each other because how much you know a person obviously factors in a lot.
Yeah.
That's all part of this equation. Like if you barely know this person, but you know someone who knows this person, that'll factor into it. But like if if let's say I ask you to do a favor, um, that winds up requiring no effort from me. If I ask you, oh, can you just like pick up this parcel, bring it back for me or
Hmm.
something, and it requires like a minute of your time versus it would have taken me 5 hours.
Hmm.
Um, and even though at the end of the day you're doing a minute and I'm doing zero,
Hmm.
I think that comes into the calculus of like for the good of other people, like how people should act for like I think that it's rude to ask someone to do something for you that would for sure if it required the same amount of time.
Yeah.
Like then why should I do something that you could do yourself,
Right.
assuming that you don't have no restrictions, you're completely capable and able, no time constraints, whatever,
Yeah.
no constraints. But if it would save you time, then maybe it isn't something that is a reasonable thing to ask. And then like all these different calculations. I've thought of this stuff before because sometimes I ask people to do stuff, people ask me to do stuff.
For sure. Uh, I want to go back to whether morality is just reducible to social consequences
Okay.
because I don't think it is. And part of the reason it's not is that the social consequences are based on something. It's not as if other people's reactions are arbitrary. For the most part, people react in a way that is there are patterns and rules and ways to understand how people behave and people's reactions towards you. It's not as if every other human being in the world is kind of just this. To you, their behavior is arbitrary and they're just doing whatever. It's like if I were to borrow money and not pay it back, um, there is a hurt that I caused. Now, in the case of $10, the monetary hurt is not much, but there's a hurt of feeling neglected, feeling like what I'm. You think you can just walk over me? You think you can just borrow $10 from me and then not pay it back? Like it's there's a lack of respect. Um, and I'm using all these words because all these words we understand what they mean, and we all feel that. And so it's not just the fact, meaning you can say that from the perspective of the person who's not paying back the money, he can choose to not care about any of these moral considerations, and to him the only thing that might keep him in line is the social consequence. But that doesn't mean that the other moral considerations don't exist, and that the social consequences are sort of derived are a result of the human pain and the human experience that is affected by these actions, and that is more fundamental than simply the social consequences that manifest from those. And also, I think it's more there is something objective to that as well.
So I would agree with you. I think you said it's more fundamental, and I would say sure.
Mhm.
I think social consequences would be the first layer of 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 understanding morality. And then why are there social consequences? You
Mhm.
could you could also take it apart, pick it apart like that, dissect it. You could say, why do people feel a feeling of hurt? Well, because as humans evolved in their tribes, we all had to learn how to work together.
Hmm.
Um, Humans are very communal animals. Other animals might just, you know, if you're a polar bear, I don't know, or a wolves hunted packs, whatever. But there's all this hierarchy. There's all this communication. There's all the, so, a polar bear might just like attack whatever comes at it and never collaborate with anything. Humans have to learn to collaborate. They need to learn to not hurt the group for the sake of themselves, unless it's good. I don't know. Sometimes people have evolved to like it when people are mean to them. They like it when people maybe not they don't express it as like in the same way, but people like being told what to do. People like being run over. There are definitely people like that, partially because it of this principle, not just that you shouldn't harm your community, but also that you should maybe let other people harm you in the same way, because both are useful ideas for survival. On the one hand, harming another is not good for everyone, but on the other hand, allowing yourself to be harmed is a useful trait as well for survival of the group.
Okay, that was interesting. So it sounds like, see, I would say I don't think that anyone likes being walked over. Rather, some people are used to it,
Uh,
and they're comfortable. They're comfortable there, but I don't think they like it.
I think that there's
Even those who perhaps
so maybe you haven't
seems.
met those type of people, or maybe it's
I think
just a little confusing because
I think we just
no,
haven't met them.
most people wouldn't say I like being run over, but a lot of people would say I like being told what to do. Some people
Oh,
like,
because for the sake of not having to figure out what to do themselves.
yeah,
Okay, but
and
that's
or they even like pain. They're just maybe you're right. Maybe they were abused or something as a child, and then they've gotten used to that
mhm.
feeling. But I would argue the same is probably true evolutionarily, that humans have been abusing each other for millennia. So we've gotten, even when you're born, you have a disposition to like that. Or at least some people do.
I'm not sure what that
It means that just like, someone might be abused as a kid, learn to, and then develop certain behaviors, certain things are just ingrained in the human experience as well that they like. Not that they like, but that they are. That, over time, it's not just that things that you lived as experiences you had as a child developed you as a person later. The things that happened to your ancestors um, also change who you are. So if your ancestors were more submissive, that means that you're more likely to be submissive because genetic material is passed on. And being your ancestors being
Hold on,
submissive,
because genetic material is passed on. Oh, fine. We're assuming that it's in their genetics to be submissive.
yeah. That when I said disposition, I mean like you're born to be like that,
Okay,
have a disposition towards it.
but then I may as well just say that you are more likely to be submissive because it's in your genes to be submissive, not because your ancestors
Uh, okay, but they're the same thing because the reason that your genes are to be submissive is because
were.
your
Your ancestors had
ancestors
those genes.
had those genes. They were useful for survival, and that's why they passed on those genes to you. The people that weren't submissive fought back against their, like, let's say you had
Okay,
a whole bunch, your ancestors were slaves.
right.
If you fought back, then more likely to die.
But the thing is, I don't know if we can say that anyone is genetically disposed to be submissive or dominant.
But
We we
I think
all
we have that DNA mixed around in us, and I think we
right.
have certain people have more. I think that yeah, depending on your environment, you could be more submissive if that's how you were raised, more dominant if that's how you were raised. It could express itself differently, or maybe in a way you can't really say it, but you're more disposed to be submissive. Not I can't say 55% submissive, 45% not dominant, but like maybe you're more just born that way to be more.
I would offer a different paradigm with this. I don't think that anyone is more disposed to be dominant or more disposed to be submissive. In fact, I would argue that one who is disposed to be submissive is also disposed to be dominant, depending on what they're facing. Meaning, the person who submits to something that they perceive as more powerful than them will attempt to dominate something that they perceive as not as less powerful than them. The two, it's kind of a one's a shadow, one's the id, one's the ego. If I'm referencing Freud correctly, they're like two sides of a psychological coin. So it doesn't seem right to me to say that some people are supposed to be submissive, some people are supposed to be dominant. There are people who,
Like, I agree. If you took twins, separated them at birth, sent one to a dominant school, one to a submissive school,
okay,
then one of them is going to be dominant, the other is going to be submissive. I just mean more like in the everyday life, you know, it's not, we're not sent to dominant or submissive schools, we're sent to both.
uh-huh.
And one eventually, like you're saying, okay, it's not one eventually, it depends on the situation. For some people, you're more dominant. For other people in your life, you're more submissive. To your parents, you're more submissive. To your children, you're more dominant.
Right.
So,
But there's also, we can't just reduce, there are other choices. You don't necessarily have to be dominant or submissive. You can be,
well, when it comes to conflict, that's
you
the
can be equal.
usual
You can be playful. You can be a partner, a teammate.
collaborative, right?
Yeah, you can collaborate.
But I would say that that requires maybe to be submissive in some respects to the same person and could be dominant in other. Like, let's say your friend doesn't give you back the $10 that he borrowed,
Mhm.
but he's a great friend in like every other aspect. So
Okay.
you're submissive on that $10 thing, but you could still be equal, let's say, collaborative in other things and dominant in, I don't know, in other things with that friend. Like it, but like if you're looking at monkeys in nature, then like and more simple relationships,
Hmm.
oftentimes they could be pinned down to submissive and dominant, or just like non-interact. Like I don't know, have yeah, I mean, like if you have a relationship with someone, then there are certain things like a friendship or like a romantic relationship, certain things that you're probably more dominant on, certain things that you're submissive on,
Hmm.
certain things that like if you're equal, that means that you both don't really have uh what's it called either way, a preference either way,
Well, so, but
and
now
there's
you're,
no conflict, and you're just in agreement on that issue.
yeah, but now I think you're misusing dominant for, like, in a friendship or a romantic relationship, if something just means a lot more to somebody, to one partner, to one of the people, and less to the other person may submit in this scenario to the person who's more passionate about it. But that's not submitting to the person in the sense of like, I'm lowering my sense of power and letting you dominate. It's more just it's a choice. It's sort of it is a playful. It's a choice within the dance. You know what I mean? It's
Right. You don't
it,
have to debase yourself. You're just by giving in on one thing and saying, okay, we'll get pineapple pizza tonight.
right.
It's not a big deal, but you are submitting to them. You are being submissive for pineapple. It's just not a big deal. As
Um,
much as when they punch you in the face and you decide to back
right.
down and cry uncle.
Yeah. Well, so I guess we have to. Uh, these two things seem different to me because before we were talking. This all started when we mentioned that there are people who like being abused. I think.
Well, we were not abused necessarily, more so. I mean, yeah, maybe also people like to be abused, whatever. But I meant more just that there's a whole dynamics of human relationships when it comes to. Um, we were talking about repercussions from your communal community. What did we call
So
it?
social
Social
consequences.
social consequences. And that my point was just that they are, it's just all to get us collaborating. But sometimes, it's not just um, don't uh, don't dominate anyone. Sometimes that's okay, or don't you don't have to submit to everyone, but sometimes that's okay. So it's just the goal is not don't do bad to other people. The goal is ensure survival of the species because because like I don't know, monkeys rape each other or whatever, humans used to or whatever, and at some point, there were no social consequences for that. Objectively, it was wrong, yes. And
When were there no social consequences for rape?
if you were a king, if you were the, a lord or a higher up chieftain,
Okay, so
then there was this. You determined what the social consequences were, and
well, okay, so I don't think so. You could make you could avoid certain consequences due to your power if you were the king, but I think that
you could also say like this is I'm gonna sacrifice this child because and make it a moral thing, not just say I can get away with it because I'm the king. Haha. There, you could frame it in a way like this is what is morally correct.
in your mind you could say
No,
that.
the whole Aztec, not the whole. I'm sure people disagreed, but they generally thought that it was moral to sacrifice children to the
Um,
sun gods because the gods were the most important or something. And
well, I could accept that they thought that the gods wanted that, perhaps that they were appeasing the gods, but I don't think they had a moral understanding. I don't think they really thought it was moral.
of course
They
they did.
they did it, and they thought the gods wanted it, perhaps.
You think
But
that they
they're
said, "Oh, we're doing a bad thing, an immoral thing, but we have to because the gods are immoral"?
no. I think that their morality was didn't extend past appeasement of the gods, but
Okay, but it
um,
was still their morality, and we could still agree that, like, okay, they had a very low level of morality that today, we're still arguing about what is moral because we still can't make up our minds in many conflicts around the world. But what if you could break down morality into, people have tried to break down morality. Don't do to others what you want done to yourself.
mhm.
That's a pretty good summation of morality. It has um, a lot of flaws in the rationality.
Mhm.
It has a lot of contradictions. What does that mean? Don't do to someone else. Is it like, what if you like pain? Does that mean you should do it to someone else?
Right.
But
And also, what if this person is, allergic to peanut butter and you're not?
right. So feed them peanut butter. So it doesn't actually sum it up because you can't really. It's very difficult.
Mhm.
You need a whole codex of law to be written. A whole library of law books, which they have, and to try to
Well,
contain everything.
I would argue that the better way to capture morality is through story, and not through law books. What you need is a strong mythology to understand what don't do to others what you would not want done to yourself really means.
Well, I think it would definitely help explain, 'cause rather than just one word, because one sentence, because a lot of cultures do that. Like even Hollywood itself is now it has a big um, Hollywood has a lot or had a lot of control of what determines morality in Western culture, and based off the mythology that they would use. And obviously, all the early civilizations had their own stories and mythos.
You don't think that Hollywood was upstream of the culture, or
Uh,
downstream is what I mean. I think you don't think that Hollywood was a result of the culture that existed
I think it
under.
was a feedback loop. I think it didn't come out of nowhere, but I think their movies also, you know, probably the older generation, learned, let's say, war movies or something.
Hmm.
Maybe um, they used to be more, it's all about dying for your country and blah blah, and then all these Vietnam War movies came out, and it's more about how war is just hell, and there's nothing really, it's not
Hmm.
really noble,
Hmm.
and we should just do all we can to avoid it.
Hmm.
And that was the brainchild of certain people of Hollywood who were, of course, influenced by other people around the country at the time. But then the people watching those movies were influenced by them. And so it was kind of this back and forth. It's always been at, I think, just, it's been at the forefront, but also it's definitely not been simply a reflection. It has definitely paved the way for things as well. Um, but just going back to sum up what I was saying, how many people view morality as just don't do to others that you don't harm others, and
Hmm.
that's complicated. Okay, what about that? Doesn't solve the abortion problem because in abortion, should you not harm the baby or should you not harm the woman?
Okay.
So it doesn't solve anything there. It just creates more. But in general, don't hurt others, don't cause pain to others, don't do negative things to others. That would mean, you shouldn't sacrifice children
Hmm.
because don't cause pain to others. Don't do. You wouldn't want to be sacrificed. I don't know. Maybe you would. So it's not 100% leak proof, but it's a good it's a good starting point, and it's how most of Western culture, at least, I don't know, maybe Eastern culture as well, but follow has developed over time its morality.
There's a lot more to go into here. We touched very briefly on only a few topics. It's actually, we're over 2 hours now.
Hmm.
It's also past 11.
And we probably didn't press the record button, right?
Nope, we pressed it. It's recorded. Probably needs a little bit of editing, but
Probably.
yeah. So I think we will wrap it up here. If Benji, you are in agreement to do that.
That sounds like a good idea.
Okay. Um, we covered far more topics than we expected, and many of which we have to delve more deeply on another time. So long.